Good morning, everybody. We are back with another devotion. This will make 24 episodes here so far during this winter season. Been doing devotions. If you haven't seen the videos, go back and please watch them. I think that you will be very encouraged by them. So, today we are going to talk about looking from the rock from which you came from. So it's very encouraging. We're going to get right into this. So, a lot of times when we're seeking the Lord, seeking God, we have to encourage ourselves or look back to something or look into something so that we can get through what we're going through. And this is definitely not a sprint. This is definitely a marathon. And during the marathon, there's a lot of hurdles. There's a lot of jumping obstacles. There's a lot of things that you got to get through to get to finish the race, And during the time of you running this race, you need to look into those that have gone before you, and actually, especially the rock from which you were hewn, the Bible says. So we need to look back to even the pit. It says that which you were dug from. Now, that's a very interesting statement. It says in Isaiah, look to the pit that which you were dug from. So, in other words, you came from nothing and became something. So, just like Abraham, when he started out, he came from nothing and ended with this inheritance as the stars, as descendants, as the sand of the sea, sand and the stars in the heavens, just in other words, multitude, So he was the father of our faith. So at times we have to look back, not like Lot's wife looking back, but looking back to the patriarchs and how they got through things and what they did, because as you see in the book of Acts, you see them even talking. They'll jump up and start preaching or remembering, what Joseph and Abraham and what all the patriarchs did by faith. So these guys are to encourage us and what they did, how they did. Now, Isaiah 51 says, "Listen to me, all you who follow after righteousness. You who seek the Lord, you who seek the Lord, you who seek Elohim, you who seek the God of the heavens and the earth, the God who created everything. You who seek the Lord, look to the rock." Isaiah is telling us this. Look to the rock from which you were hewn. In other words, which you were cut out from. You were cut from that rock. You are a descendant of Abraham. If you if you believe in the Messiah, confess with your mouth and believe in your heart that he was raised from the dead, you'll be saved. You enter into a covenant that goes all the way back to Abraham. Now, Abraham was the father of our faith, and he was the beginning. I mean, he was the beginning of a covenant that left Babylon. Now, this is going to be a very interesting thing I'm about to talk about, because it's very, very key. So let's keep going. In the hole in the pit which you were dug from, look to the rock from which you were hewn, and the hole from the pit from which you were dug. It says, look to Abraham your father and Sarah who bore you. Now, isn't that interesting? It's not that we naturally come from Abraham or Sarah. They are our mother and papa, you could say, spiritually, because everything started with Abraham, the covenant. And it says right here, verse 2, "For I called him alone, and blessed him and increased him." So this is very interesting, because you may feel that like you are alone at times, but Abraham also was called out from a father's house, probably full of idols and everything else, in the land of Babylon, or the land of Ur, or Chaldeans, which is very interesting. We're going to get into that. So, blessed him and increased him. But he was called out alone, There wasn't much going on then. I mean, there wasn't, and God is calling us too now. And it may not look like much is going on in your life, but God has a destiny for you to have descendants like Abraham. Look to Abraham, because who has despised the day of small beginnings, the book of Zechariah says, So who has despised the days that are small? Because God has a plan. So just because you start out looking like nothing's going on doesn't mean it's going to end that way. So you must have faith, and just remember and look back to the rock from which you were hewn. So it will encourage you, especially in the day that we're living in right now. I mean, this is frustrating and stressful, and walking the narrow path can be very lonely. So you just got to remember that Abraham was called out alone too, and he walked out of his father's house. In other words, he left what he formerly knew. When you come into the kingdom, you leave what you formerly know, and you walk into something of unknownness. And it's unknown to you and me when we first are born again. We're walking into this, and it's unknown at times. So it's a land of the unknown. I mean, the land of Canaan, it was unknown to Abraham, and we're walking into a land that's unknown to us, So in doing so, we must remember the patriarchs before us and what they did, how they did, how they got through it, what their faith was and how it was. So it encourages us, So just keep that and remember that, because it's going to help you. It helps me. And so, verse 3, for the Lord will comfort Zion. See, this is a comforting thing, And he will comfort all her waste places, and he will make her wilderness like Eden. Interesting. And her desert like the garden of the Lord. Joy and gladness will be found in it, thanksgiving of the voice of melody. So, very interesting statement there. So we're going to get into Abraham, but the Lord will comfort Zion through these things. We are Zion, Zion. We're going to get into that in another video. Why Zion's Gate? Why are we Zion's Gate? We'll talk about that in a different video. But Zion's Gate is in Psalms. He loves the gates of Zion more than all the dwellings of Jacob. Now, that's a whole nother video. So let's go back and talk about Abraham. So Abraham was called out of his own country, from his own family, and let's go to Genesis 12, verse 1. Get out of your country, from your family, and from your father's house. So everything from what, and he said, in the land that I will show you, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I'll curse those who curse you. And in all the families of the earth you shall be all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Now, Abraham was called out. And it's interesting, if you see where Abraham was called out, he was called out of, as you could say, Babylon. Babylon, if you look at the map, you'll understand that it's from the land of Mesopotamia. It is southern portion, I believe. It is in Babylon, okay? So God called him out of the land of Chaldeans. And the Chaldeans, you heard, come out of the land of the Chaldeans. And Jeremiah will talk about come out of Babylon. In the book of Revelation, come out of Babylon. Come out of the midst of her. Well, if you look all the way back to the very beginning of our father of faith, which is Abraham, you'll see that he was called out of Babylon. And he formerly, what he knew in his father's house, he was called out. God is still calling us out of Babylon right now, to come out of that country that we formerly know, come out of that country of what our families have taught us and generations have taught us, and go to the land that's the unknown. So the land of the unknown is a mysterious walk. It can be a little interesting because you don't know what it looks like, what this faith looks like, how you live by faith, and how you enter in, because you can't enter into the Spirit without entering in by faith. So you must enter in, and you must enter into the kingdom, because if you enter in by the kingdom, you got to enter in by faith. Nothing's pleased by anything in heaven but faith, So to enter in, you got to get out of the country of Babylon. So Abraham did the same thing. They left from the land of Ur when God called him out. And the interesting part about this, and it says in verse 11, 31, it says, and they went out with him from the land of Ur and of the Chaldeans to go into the land of Canaan. And they came to Haran and dwelt there. So the days of Terah, his father, were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Abraham's father died in Haran. So they stopped off in Haran. I think 5 years. They stopped off in Haran. So it's interesting. This is what happens to a lot of Christians. I mean, you get called out of Babylon. You start to get born again. You start going deep. You start finding out truth. But then you just kind of settle off into a city. You just kind of settle there. And you decide to settle there, It's just, this is good enough, God called him to the land of Canaan, the promised land, a land that flows with milk and honey, a land that, a land that God was going to give him. But they just decided to settle off in Haran, and maybe they just thought this is comfortable, 5 years, and just didn't keep going. I mean, what was the purpose behind that? I mean, it just kind of makes you wonder. A lot of times we just settle, we just settle and get complacent, and just think, okay, this is enough, and you forget the promises. You forget the promises that God called you out. God has a calling on your life, to do mighty things. And sometimes we just get complacent and we just get stuck, And Abraham just kind of got stuck in Haran. I mean, they just got stuck there for 5 years. I mean, when they were supposed to go to the promised land, Canaan. So a lot of times we get stuck, and we got to get complacency out of our lives, and that is exactly what happens when you start walking the narrow road. So a lot of people start digging into the truth and start finding out more information, and you're coming out of Babylon. And it gets a little too intense. It gets a little too deep. So you just want to settle in Haran. You just want to chill out there and not go further. And a lot of Christians stay in Haran. A lot of believers stay in Haran. They never do enter in. Entering into the land of promise, the land that's a covenant of Abraham, is those who go deep, you could say. Those who want to go enter in, instead of just settling halfway. They went halfway. We can't go halfway these days, guys. We got to go full way. We got to go all the way. We got to believe the whole Bible, not just half the Bible. Can't just believe some scriptures, we got to believe all the scriptures, And this is what's going on in the church today. I mean, we believe some things. We want to pull out a few scriptures that work for us, and we just don't want to believe the rest, Don't want to go the rest of the way. So, guys, I'm just challenging you today to go to the promised land. Get to Canaan. Go to the destination that God's called you out in. He's called you out for a purpose. He called you out for a calling. You have a calling in him, so you have a destiny in him. And that destiny it's a promise. It's a promise for you to enter into God's kingdom. And he has great and mighty things in store for you, just like he did for Abraham. He said, I'm calling you out, and your descendants will be like the stars in the heavens or the sand on the seashore. So God has a plan. And just don't settle in Haran today. I just go to where he's telling you to go. Because even though it might look deep, and even though it might look strange, even though it might look weird, even though it might be uncomfortable for you, you do what God tells you to do. That's what it comes down to. And you will be greatly blessed for doing it, just like Abraham was. You will be greatly blessed. He will curse those who curse you. He will bless those who bless you. If you stay on that path and not settle, stay on the path and get with it, guys, because we're getting close to the end times. We're getting close. We are in the end times. I mean, we're getting close to tribulation. That's what I mean. So we got to get with it, and we got to, the calling of God. God is calling. He's announcing. He's calling us out of the land of the Chaldeans and Ur. He's calling us out of Babylon. So we've got to get that together, just like Abraham was. Now, an interesting thing we talked about the second time is, now you can just see the second time erupting in Abraham's life. So if you go on down to Abraham, or Genesis chapter 10, now there was a famine in the land, and Abram went down to Egypt to dwell there, and the famine was in the land was severe. Now this is the beginning, and it just goes to show you how bearing witness, we talked about this before in a prior video on the second time, how God does things a second time. Now he bared witness even through Abraham that there was a famine in the land, and they went to get from food from Egypt, and Egypt, Pharaoh took in Abraham's wife because she was beautiful, and then God began to plague Pharaoh with the famine. And think about it. This very same thing happened with Joseph. There was a great famine in the land. They went to Egypt for grain. And then what happened? Then slavery of Israel was with Egypt, and God plagued Pharaoh. So this is it's like a second time. God was rehearsing. It was like a foreshadowing. So God shows it from the beginning. Even Melchizedek coming on the scene with bread and wine. I mean, this is all a prophetic shadow, And so if you understand that things happen a second time in Scripture and how that shadow portrays, you're going to understand prophecy a whole lot more. A whole lot more. So if you read this, you're going to understand that when Joseph stepped on the scene and a famine was in the land, you could see it already was proclaimed in Abraham's life. And that God plagued Pharaoh because of Abraham's wife. And then God plagued Pharaoh in Moses' time because of who? God's wife, the bride, Israel. See? So just an amazing correlation there. So you can see this happening in verse 12:17. But the Lord plagued Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarah, Abraham's wife. Now, when God plagued the children of Israel with Moses, it was because of Israel, God's wife. You see? And so it was a God foreshadowed things in Abraham's story. So this happens all throughout Scripture. All throughout Scripture. If you have eyes to see it, you'll start understanding it. And if you understand this little concept, you're going to understand end time prophecy so well. You won't be confused. You won't feel left in the dark. You won't be tossed by false doctrine. So that is a key thing, because God did not leave us as orphans. He did not leave us nor forsake us. He left us with the truth. But you just have to have eyes to discern it. You have to have eyes to see it. And you cannot listen to false prophets, because they will sow into you falsehood, and it will cause you to be confused. Okay? So stick with the Scriptures and ask God to open your eyes of the bearing of witness, the shadow. It's a shadow. Ask him to open up that to you so you'll have revelation. Now, he will too. He will. Now, just like this, and Pharaoh got tired of the plagues. He said, take her away, take your wife away. We're not going to go in the whole story, but this is interesting. It just goes to show you, take her away. So Pharaoh commanded him concerning, and they sent her away with his wife Abraham and all he had. Take her away. Well, remember in Moses with the plagues, he said, hey, get him out of here. This is too much. You see, this is a shadow. Same thing happened with Moses and the children of Israel. So Abraham's life was prophesying, coming out of the land of Babylon from the beginning, calling you into the land of Canaan. So what is God doing now? He's calling us out of Babylon. He's calling us out of the land of the Chaldeans. He's calling us out of Egypt. And he's calling us into the promised land, the land of promise, the land where milk and honey flows, and God can dine with you and feast with you and give you fresh bread and manna daily. Because when you're in Babylon, your mind is confused. Your life is confused. You are surrounded by idols and idolatry and manipulation and Jezebels and demonic principalities and all this stuff. And you can't see clear. You just cannot see clear when you are in Babylon. You will not see clearly. When you get out of Babylon and come out, like Abraham was called out into his own country, and when he was going, into the destiny, and then things started to unfold, and then things started prophesying, started bearing witness. His life started telling a story of things that were to come, if you want to say. Now, if you read this, what I'm telling you in the context of what I'm saying, you're going to understand. It's going to blow you away. Now, Pharaoh said, get him out of here, just like he did with Moses. Same thing. And there was a famine in the land, and they went down to Egypt to dwell there, for grain, because that's what they needed, just like Joseph. So it started with Joseph, and then Moses, and Abraham entered to the land of Canaan. He enters into the promise, and then you have just amazing situations going on here. And then if you want to go look back to the book of Acts, Stephen, before he was stoned, he jumps up. It says, brothers, listen. Acts chapter 7. And he says, brothers and fathers, listen, the glory of God appeared to our father Abraham. So in the book of Acts, Stephen's remembering, he's looking back to our fathers of faith, and which is, these guys were an example to us, folks. I mean, he was an example to us so that we would have an understanding. So he said, brothers and fathers, listen. The glory of God appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran. So it just goes to show you right there that he was in Mesopotamia, the land of Ur, or land of the Chaldeans, Babylon. God called him out of what he formerly knew, but then he goes and dwells in Haran and just dwells there. Like I said, where a lot of Christians just want to go halfway. They don't want to go to the full destination. They want to settle in Haran. They don't want to go to the distance. Now, guys, we cannot do that. We talked about that a minute ago. We cannot settle in Haran. We got to get our butts out of Haran, okay? So now, and then he says, and he dwelt in Haran. And then he said, get out of your own country and your relatives and come to the land that I will show you. Then he came to the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran, like we just talked about. And from there, when his father was dead, once his father died in Haran, which is interesting because, that's what happens when you just dwell somewhere, guys. Death will come because you got to keep going. You got to keep finishing the race. You cannot just settle or you're going to die in the wilderness. The wilderness, you can't settle around that mountain. You got to go to the Jordan. Cross the Jordan and not die in the wilderness, okay? Don't settle around the mountain, okay? And he moved him to this land to which you now dwell, okay? He moved him to the land which you now dwell, and God gave him no inheritance in it, inheritance in it, not even enough to set his foot on. But when Abraham had no child, he promised to give him for a possession and a descendants after him. Abraham didn't even have a child at that point. He didn't even have nothing to show of, and God promised him of it. And he was even at old age, but God spoke in this way, that his descendants would dwell there in a foreign land, and they would bring him into in a foreign land, and that they would bring them into bondage and oppress them 400 years. And he goes on and telling the story, and it says, the covenant of the circumcision of Abraham begot Isaac, the circumcision on the 8th day, and Jacob begot the 12 patriarchs. So, interesting. Just a quick morning devotion. I just wanted to thank you guys for listening. And to be honest with you, Abraham, looking back to Abraham from the rock which you were hewn, and realize that these guys also had to leave Babylon, had to leave what they formerly knew, and walk into a place that was unknown to them. And today, God is calling you to leave the land of Babylon spiritually, in your mind, in your heart, your homes, and to go into a land that's unknown to you. It's unknown. It's a land that's unknown, but it's okay. God's saying, hey, I am with you in this. All the patriarchs before you have gone through this. They've gone through a time of testing, a time of walking through the desert, of walking through a place that was unknown. And guys, this is what God is calling us to. So let us enter into our inheritance, and let us leave what we formerly knew, all of our idols, all of our traditions, all of man-made traditions, all of the things that we've been taught by our fathers and forefathers, which are lies. We must leave all this stuff behind us and move forward. If you want to enter into the land of Canaan, you have to leave this stuff behind. You cannot go forward, or you're going to stay in Haran. You cannot go forward with the things that we have been taught and sown since our childhood. If your children are in public schools, would tell you right now, you need to remove your children from schools. They are brainwashing your kids, teaching them how to be great little Egyptians and serve Pharaoh. Guys, you cannot let them do this to you or your children, because they're raising them up. Teach a child in the way they should go, and they will not depart from it. This is what has happened. They train children, they get them manipulated, they get them brainwashed, they get them in the system to be a good little Egyptian, to be a good little Babylonian, and the next thing you know, they grow up and we have a generation falling away. So guys, be very cautious about what your children are learning, what you in your home are doing, and leave Babylon today, just like Abraham called him out. So guys, God is calling you today. He's given you a calling, and he wants you to walk in it. And he wants you to do not be afraid if it looks alone, because the men before you were alone too. Shalom, guys. Let's walk in this journey in the narrow path. Love you guys. Have a great day. It's good devotion. See you on another one. Shalom.